let's see here. So while I'm fumbling, I'm Jeremy Tirrell from UNC Wilmington. Go Seahawks. Let's see here. Oh yeah, there we are. So this is a food panel, so let's talk about not eating. This is Soylent and Juicero, Conspicuous and Invisible Consumption. As I said, I'm Jeremy Tirrell from UNC Wilmington. Right there. So on the other motion. So my argument basically today is Soylent, in keeping with its name, as we'll talk about, presents a figuratively ghoulish consumption of inert matter through a reduction of bodies to algorithms. Conversely, Juicero advances a metaphorical vampirism by promising continued health by ingesting fresh living organisms, offering an atavistic return to a primal mode of living, paradoxically enabled only through advanced technology. So these two objects, they're different, but they function as ends on a continuum, and they share certain assumptions about ethics and what is good, that position nutrition as simultaneously performative and concealed. So this matters because how we describe the body and sustenance has far-reaching implications for personal and social conceptions of nutrition, wellness and illness, and public health. And increasingly perspectives drawn from digital startup culture are framing these conversations. Right? This work is situated in what Scott and Melanchthon call the rhetoric of health and medicine, or RHM, examinations of the discourses around biological issues taking place since about the 1990s in journals such as TCQ, Technical Communication Quarterly, Journal of Medical Humanities, Communication Quarterly, and then monographs and collections like Hawhe's Bodily Arts, Fountain's fairly recent Rhetoric in the Flesh, and this very recent collection, Methodologies for the Rhetoric of Health and Medicine. Materialist rhetoric is an appropriate frame, I think, because it's more of an approach, a collection of tools, rather than a discipline dedicated to particular methods and particular areas of content. In fact, Scott and Melanchthon say material rhetoric's capaciousness is its strength. It's a useful tool for creating and critiquing discourse of all kinds. So, do folks know what Soylent is? Most of us probably do. Some of us do, some of us don't. Do folks know what Soylent Green is?
Yeah.
What is it? It's people, right? Spoilers for a 45-year-old movie. Soylent is essentially a meal replacement liquid, similar to something like Ensure or Boost or Slim Fast or any of the powders or shakes that are focused on health or nutrition. It's mostly sold online, but you can actually get it from 7-Elevens in places like LA. Something that sets it apart is its startup-driven approach to nutrition, complete with a successful crowdfunding campaign to the tune of about 20 million, or excuse me, more than that, 20 million in Series A investment, so of course crowdfunding and investment. It's even sold in version numbers. Right, we can see over here 1.8, 1.7, 1.6, complete with corresponding release notes like a software product. I mean, it has, change log associated with a food. The product, which is commonly sold through a subscription, of course, it was designed by the company's CEO, Rob Reinhart, an electrical engineer. He's not a nutritionist, he's not a biologist, he's not a chemist, he's not a doctor, physician. He's an electrical engineer who taught himself about nutrition through available online sources primarily. It also seeks to disrupt eating.
Seriously, that is what it tries to do.
That's its ostensible goal, is to disrupt eating, which is a fairly, rhetoricians don't really deal in fundamental things, but that's a pretty characteristic one. It's been around for a while, probably. And it seeks to do this through efficiency gains by removing the planning and preparation from nutrition. It aims to be a single source food, i.e. replacing all of your food. The CEO claims to have lived for months on it. However, the labels themselves hedge on this for particular legal reasons. They don't say replace all of your food with this, but all of the online work says replace all of your food with this. The CEO's doing it. Right? Most of its ilk explicitly, so other things like this, explicitly say do not do that. Do not long-term replace food with this, except under very special circumstances like cancer patients, and even then only under a physician's supervision. It's also aligned with humanitarian goals in keeping with startup culture, such as providing complete nutrition to low-income people. Reinhardt stated in one interview that he lived in a poor area of Brooklyn, and this is a quotation. He said, and people were clearly much less healthy than the ones in the more affluent areas, and I thought maybe there was a way we could get healthy food to people in a more efficient way. The company also addresses environmental issues by asserting that Soylent uses less water, creates less food waste, and produces less CO2 than livestock and refrigeration, which takes a lot of energy production for preserving perishable items. And this is not, I don't think, an imposed reading. It's explicitly in the language and images of the company's website. So speaking of engineering, right? Research and engineering, it's our favorite part of eating. Breakfast engineered without a single tiny marshmallow. We take engineering as seriously as most people take bacon. Strange sentiment given they've just sort of bashed meat production. But I get it. And here it says carefully selected ingredients. An empirical design process means only the best ingredients. Make it in. And then optimized for nutrition. We can also see the language of disruption reiterated. Let us take a few things off your plate. Hilarious metaphor, but also the explicit goal, right? We want to take away the act of eating. Food, reformatted. Complete nutrition, achievement unlocked, right? Gamifying this, essentially. Food is much easier when it's drink. I like that one. And then we solved nutrition. It just needed shaking up. Again, a couple of metaphors there. Positing food as an equation to be solved. Remember, that's the language of math. It's so seeped in, we don't even acknowledge that. It needed shaking up. A little bit of wordplay. And then humanitarian goals, right? Helping by feeding. They've donated over 1 million meals, Soylent products. And as it says, better for you and better for the planet. And waste nothing, right? It's engineered to have a low environmental impact, and it's got a recyclable bottle. So waste nothing. This also appears in their social media products like this that popped up in my Facebook feed because I was researching this. When it started showing up, we've mapped the food genome. Again, sort of biological engineering, but also, as we can see, nonsensical. Right? You can't map the food genome. You can map a particular species genome. And then this crowdfunding slogan, free your body, right, which appeared on bags and T-shirts. The notion that you can be unencumbered by the flesh, right? We can just sort of write that off, and then we can focus on what's really important, efficiency. So notice how statements such as achievement unlocked, optimized for nutrition, we've solved nutrition, depict this as a performative lifestyle marker, right? As does clothing, of course. This is for people who are too busy being productive to eat. It also suggests conspicuous accomplishment through redress of large-scale humanitarian issues. I'm doing my part to save the world. Right? Notice also the overt reiteration of transparency, which pops up again and again on their website. But as rhetorician Kenneth Burke reminds us, seeing something occurs by excluding other things. Right? So the labels indicate what is and isn't in the formula, vegan but not organic, and they do use GMOs, but it's not free. But they don't address issues such as sourcing, and this is actually important because pretty much since it's existed, it's been periodically and mysteriously making people violently ill.
Oh my God.
They may have traced this to a particular component in algae flour, although that's maybe not true because it wasn't in some of the products, apparently, that were causing illness. So the point here is that the claim of total transparency elides paradigmatic assumptions about what falls within that field of vision, right? When you say we're completely transparent, you're not acknowledging all the things that are outside of that focus. And that's, that's not malicious, it's necessary. Sight requires a blindness on the periphery. David Sachs states in his New Yorker piece, The Real Soylent Sickness, the tech world approaches food from the perspective of engineering a defined problem to be solved with the right equations, formulas, compounds, and brain power. Moreover, the assumption here is to fail fast and often and then iterate to correct the issue. But when we're dealing with food instead of software, not only is there a lag, but there are serious health consequences. You'd think nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea would derail a meal substitute, but often adherents instead deflect that to congenital intolerances. So they blame the drinkers, not the meal. Right? This kind of identity formation through exclusion based on an implicit purity test is similar to what Garrett McCord observes in his thesis examining the exclusionary rhetoric of the slow food movement's recipes and literature. Right? So we see this sort of thing other places. So in sum, what we can see is that Soylent is a conspicuous performative lifestyle marker steeped in startup culture, correspondingly predicated on solving perceived biological inefficiency. It foregrounds a nebulous amelioration of large-scale humanitarian issues and is enabled by a thorough abstraction of the body to an equation that can be balanced with decontextualized matter. Right? Remember their claim that they've solved nutrition. So this elides our lack of certainty about the elements and processes of nutrition and health, which we don't completely understand. And through an emphasis on transparency, conceals material aspects of its own production. So despite explicitly invoking a ghoulish metaphor, I mean, Soylent is explicitly talking about Soylent Green, that positions the body and sustenance as only inert stuff, the matter matters. And this isn't only an issue for insulated Silicon Valley society or a hypothetical class of moneyed elites. A similar but not identical line of thinking underpins things like the forced nasal feeding of Ensure to Gitmo detainees. You may remember this. Also, the punitive use of Nutriloaf, which is given to misbehaving inmates. Right? Prison wardens point out that it's enough to keep prisoners healthy without requiring utensils. This might sound familiar. Waste nothing. Right? Don't even need your utensils. Here's a close-up just in case you're curious. So anyway, speaking of the undead, let's talk about vampires and an expensive juicer. So Juicero is akin to a Keurig, but for juice. That helps. That certainly was part of its pitch that garnered it over $100 million in venture capital. It tends to be known for a couple of things. Its $700 price tag at introduction that was subsequently slashed to $400. Quite a bargain. Also, a Bloomberg article that demonstrated that squeezing the bags required juice packs, and there's a quote, yields nearly the same amount of juice just as quickly and in some cases faster than using the device. You can use your hands to squeeze the bags and get the same amount of juice. So the machine is maybe somewhat unnecessary. And certainly these may be contributing factors in Juicero's ultimate shutdown, which occurred in September of this year. They're closed down now. And there was a lot of sort of schadenfreude about that. But I want to disinter that coffin because behind the sort of casual dismissal of Silicon Valley run amok, there's some issues with this that don't remain buried. For one thing, that $700 price tag may have been a bargain. Tech writer Ben Einstein wrote in a Bolt blog about his teardown of the machine. Of the hundreds of consumer products I've taken apart over the years, this is easily among the top 5% on the complexity scale. All of this is to create a product, this is no longer his quotation, all of this is to create a product that exerts a force that is, in the words of company founder Doug Evans, enough to lift 2 Teslas. And if that's not a conspicuous lifestyle marker, I don't know what is. Also, much of the product's development hinged on creating a supply chain for these packages of fresh produce. According to Brian Menegas's company profile in Gizmodo, Juicero initially focused on working with small local farms and ugly produce, right? Things that couldn't be sold in grocery stores just for appearance reasons, but of course were nutritious. That's where they started, but they ultimately ended up partnering with conglomerates such as Dole in order to establish an appropriate infrastructure. So what's interesting here is the visible borrowing of an almost homeopathic aura, right? The notion that the position that small local produce is in some way unquantifiably better and different than mass market produce, even while they're partnering with entities like Dole, the largest producer of fruits and vegetables in the world. So this tension between specialized product and massive supply chain is actually identified as the principal reason the company shut down. This is what they said was the issue, the supply chain. We also see gestures to environmental goals such as recycling and elimination of waste. However, this leads us down some strange alleyways. The company's website formerly stated that once pressed, once you press the bags, the pulp inside can be eaten, that's our preference, or composted. That raises the question, if you're supposed to eat the pulp, why are you juicing in the first place? Just cut out that middle step and eat the produce, right? What's to be gained from juicing it, drinking it, then eating the remainder? The reason, of course, is that because juicing is a performative marker. I mean, it's a conspicuous ritual. We juice because it is visible. Right? That's why the company associates itself with lifestyle brands such as Goop, which they tout on their website. Ultimately, Juicero seeks to enable a primal mode of life by drinking vital liquid, which again is paradoxically only possible with advanced technology. And you see this in their language and imagery on their website. I like to pretend they're talking about people when I read this. The Earth's best delivered fresh. Drink 4.5 billion years of perfection. Source, we follow Earth's original recipe. Prep, washed, chopped, ready, pack and ship, perfectly fresh from dirt to door.
Oh my God.
And this tacit connection to vampirism isn't far-fetched. Those who watch HBO's Silicon Valley may remember a plot point. Does anyone watch this? Involving Gavin Belson, who's a tech titan, his blood boy, his transfusion partner. There's also the very real startup Ambrosia that provides this service, providing blood transfusions for youthful donors to older folks. This is based on parabiosis, which is a real effect, but not necessarily at this point taken as hard science, more of an interesting area of study. As with Soylent, we see also an emphasis on transparency on behalf of freshness. You can't see this too well, but it says you can see the exact farms that grew everything inside. This has some interesting consequences. For example, you can't use your own produce, right? If you want to go to your local farmer's market, buy produce, if you want to grow something in your own garden, take that out, use it in your $700 juicer, you cannot. Right? You have to go through their bags. Right? Transparency is contingent. So we can see connections with Soylent. Both are nutrition-focused startups that move away from food and have associated interests in humanitarian causes and investments in particular forms of transparency. But there are these significant differences, right? For Soylent, it's all just matter. For Juicero, there's something magical about specific matter, right? This is better than that carbon or whatever. Soylent seeks to balance an equation, so the numbers are uniform and arbitrary. 1 3 is the same as another 3, right? But for Juicero, that kind of mass produce model obviates things like terroir, even as they partially embrace, a mass production model. And my point here isn't to just bash these particular products, which can be a little bit easy to do. But I don't think their assumptions are necessarily good or bad. My point is that they're increasingly pervasive and becoming paradigmatic, to the point that the assumptions here are invisible, right? The economy is always good. Particular forms of what the economy means, I should say. That's why it's irrelevant that Juicero itself, I'm in the home stretch, has a stake through its heart because it lives on in products like Bodega, if you remember this, the vending machine that seeks to, they literally said we want to put the corner store out of business.
Right.
Good idea. Yeah, good pitch. This is the Bonaverde coffee roaster and brewer. Right? It's focused completely on the supply chain of how do you get coffee beans everywhere. Tefora's tea brewer slashed from $1,000 to $200 because they're also out of business. So in a final word here, artifacts such as the recent Scientific American article, The Maths of Life and Death, Our Secret Weapon in the Fight Against Disease, IBM's partnering with Nestle to use blockchain to track food spoilage, that kind of thing. What we're seeing here is the quantification of material bodies. And with that comes a corresponding resistance, asserting that some things can't be tabulated, right? Those are two horns of the same thing. So just as the body became machine-like in the industrial age and the information age, it becomes more quantitative, right? So the maths and the magic, they come together essentially. They establish different poles, but they rest on the same assumptions about biology, driven by startup culture that's becoming naturalized and invisible. All right, thank you.
Thank you.